What would you do if your own family laughed while someone hurt your child? I thought I knew my family until the moment my sister slapped my 5-year-old son for spilling juice, and my parents found it hilarious. That Sunday changed everything, and taught me that sometimes protecting your child means walking away from the people you've loved your whole life. This is my story of finding the courage to choose my son over my family's toxic expectations. If you've ever struggled with family boundaries or wondered how far you'd go to protect your child, this story is for you. Subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics and finding strength in difficult moments. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. The autumn leaves crunched beneath our feet as we walked up the familiar pathway to my parents' house in suburban Chicago. My 5-year-old son, Tyler, bounced excitedly beside me, his small hand gripping mine tightly. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the promise of another cozy family Sunday. "Mommy, can I show Grandma and Grandpa my new dinosaur book?" Tyler asked, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. He had been carrying that book everywhere since his father bought it for him last week during their weekend visit. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, adjusting his little jacket as we approached the front door. These Sunday dinners had become our tradition ever since I moved back to Chicago after my divorce. It was supposed to be a safe space for Tyler and me, a place where we could find comfort and stability during what had been a challenging year. My sister Lisa's car was already in the driveway, which meant she had arrived early with her twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. At 12 years old, the twins were going through that phase where they thought they were practically adults, and sometimes their attitude toward Tyler reflected that superiority complex. Mom greeted us at the door with her usual warm smile and enveloping hug. "There's my favorite grandson," she exclaimed, though Tyler was her only grandson. Dad appeared from the living room, newspaper still in hand, and gave Tyler a gentle pat on the head. "Hey there, buddy. Ready for some of Grandma's famous pot roast?" Dad's voice carried that special warmth he reserved for Tyler. The house smelled like home, a mixture of Mom's cooking, Dad's coffee, and that particular scent that belonged only to the house I grew up in. Tyler immediately ran to the living room to show off his dinosaur book to anyone who would listen, while I helped Mom set the table. "How was your week, honey?" Mom asked, her hands busy arranging the silverware with practiced precision. "Good, actually. Work is getting better, and Tyler's adjusting well to his new school. I had started a new job at a marketing firm downtown 3 months ago, and while the adjustment period had been stressful, things were finally falling into place." Lisa emerged from the kitchen carrying a pitcher of iced tea, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite having 2 preteens. "Jessica, how's the dating life? Any prospects?" she asked with that teasing smile that I knew meant she was about to launch into another lecture about how I needed to get back out there. "I'm focusing on Tyler and work right now," I replied, the same answer I gave every week. The truth was, I wasn't ready to complicate our lives further. Tyler and I had found our rhythm, and I wasn't eager to disrupt it. The twins came downstairs dressed in matching outfits, because apparently 12-year-olds still thought that was cool. They barely acknowledged Tyler, who was still enthusiastically explaining the difference between a Tyrannosaurus Rex and a Triceratops to anyone within earshot. "Girls, say hello to your cousin," Lisa instructed, but her tone suggested she was going through the motions rather than genuinely expecting enthusiasm. "Hi, Tyler," they said in unison, their voices flat and disinterested. Tyler, oblivious to their lack of enthusiasm, beamed at them. "Emma, Sophie, do you want to see my dinosaur book? It has pictures of fossils and everything." The twins exchanged one of those looks that preteens are so good at, the kind that says they think they're too mature for such childish things. But they sat down on the couch anyway, more out of boredom than genuine interest. Dinner was pleasant, filled with the usual family chatter. Dad told stories about his latest golf game, Mom shared neighborhood gossip, and Lisa talked about the twins' various activities: soccer, dance, piano lessons. Sometimes I felt a pang of guilt that I couldn't provide Tyler with that same level of extracurricular enrichment, but I reminded myself that we were doing just fine. Tyler was unusually quiet during dinner, which was unlike him. Usually, he was full of questions and observations, eager to be part of the adult conversation. But tonight, he seemed content to listen, occasionally offering small comments about school or his friends. "Tyler's been doing so well in kindergarten," I said, trying to draw him into the conversation. "His teacher says he's one of the best readers in the class." "That's wonderful," Mom said, reaching over to ruffle his hair. "We're so proud of you, sweetie." Tyler smiled shyly and returned to his mashed potatoes. I noticed he had barely touched his pot roast, which was unusual since it was one of his favorite meals. After dinner, we moved to the living room for dessert. Mom had made her famous apple pie, and the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar filled the air. Tyler perked up at the sight of the pie. He had always had a sweet tooth. "Can I have a big piece, Grandma?" he asked, his earlier quietness forgotten. "Of course, sweetheart. But let's get you some milk to go with it," Mom said, heading toward the kitchen. I followed her to help carry everything, and we returned to find Tyler carefully balancing his plate and cup as he made his way to the coffee table. The living room was arranged the way it had been for as long as I could remember. Dad's recliner facing the TV, the long couch where Mom liked to sit with her knitting, and the smaller love seat by the window. Tyler chose to sit on the carpet by the coffee table, which was his usual spot. He liked to spread out his books and toys there while the adults talked. The twins had claimed the couch, and Lisa was settled in the chair opposite Dad. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly peaceful. Just another Sunday evening with the family I had always counted on for support and love. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything would change. Tyler was taking small, careful bites of his apple pie when it happened. The living room was filled with the comfortable sound of family conversation. Dad was telling Lisa about his plans to winterize the garden, while Mom showed me pictures from her book club's recent outing to the botanical gardens. Tyler had been trying to balance his plate on his lap while reaching for his cup of milk on the coffee table. I should have noticed he was struggling, should have helped him, but I was distracted by Mom's story about Mrs. Henderson's dramatic reaction to a particularly steamy romance novel. The sound of glass hitting the hardwood floor cut through our conversation like a sharp blade. Tyler's milk cup had slipped from his small hands, and now white liquid was spreading across the floor, seeping toward the area rug that had been in that spot for as long as I could remember. "Oh no," Tyler whispered, his face immediately crumpling with distress. At 5 years old, he was already a sensitive child who took accidents very seriously. I'm sorry. I was already moving toward him, ready to clean up the mess and comfort him. These things happened with children. I had learned that lesson well over the past 5 years. But before I could reach him, Lisa was on her feet. "Tyler, you need to be more careful," she said, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Look at this mess." "It was an accident," I said, grabbing paper towels from the kitchen counter. "These things happen." But Lisa wasn't listening to me. She was standing over Tyler, who was now sitting frozen on the floor, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "You're old enough to know better than this," she continued, her voice rising. "You can't just be careless with other people's things." "Lisa, please," I said, returning with the paper towels. "He's 5 years old. It was an accident." Tyler's bottom lip was trembling now, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. He looked so small sitting there on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of his mistake. My heart broke for him. I knew how much he hated disappointing people, how hard he tried to be good. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, his voice barely audible. That's when Lisa did something I never could have imagined, something that would replay in my mind for weeks afterward. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed through the suddenly silent room. Tyler's head snapped to the side, and for a moment, he just sat there in shock. Then the crying began. Not just tears, but deep, heartbroken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. I stood frozen, the paper towel still in my hand, unable to process what I had just witnessed. My sister, my own sister, had just hit my child. Not a gentle correction or a tap on the hand, but a full-force slap across his face. "Lisa!" I finally found my voice. but it came out as a strangled whisper. But what happened next was even more devastating than the slap itself. Dad, who had been watching the whole scene from his recliner, began to chuckle. "Well, that got his attention," he said, as if we were watching a comedy show instead of witnessing the abuse of a 5-year-old child. Mom, who had always been Tyler's biggest advocate, who had spent countless hours reading to him and teaching him to bake cookies, actually started laughing. "Maybe next time he'll think twice before being so clumsy," she said, her voice filled with amusement. The twins, taking their cue from the adults, began giggling too. "Tyler got in trouble," Sophie said in a sing-song voice. "He totally deserved it," Emma added, and they both dissolved into laughter. I looked around the room at these people I had loved and trusted my entire life, and I felt like I was seeing them for the first time. My parents, who had raised me with love and patience, were laughing at my son's pain. My sister, who had children of her own, had just struck someone else's child. And my nieces, who I had always thought were sweet girls, were delighting in their cousin's humiliation. Tyler was still crying, his hand pressed to his cheek where a red mark was already forming. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so full of hurt and confusion, and I knew I had to act. "That is enough," I said, my voice stronger now. I knelt down beside Tyler and gently pulled him into my arms. "It's okay, baby. It's okay." "But I didn't mean to spill it," he sobbed against my shoulder. "I was trying to be careful." "I know, sweetheart. I know you were." Lisa was still standing over us, her hands on her hips. "He needs to learn that actions have consequences, Jessica. You're too easy on him." I looked up at her, this woman who shared my DNA but apparently none of my values. "He's 5 years old, Lisa. 5. And it was an accident." "Accidents happen because people aren't being careful enough," she replied, completely unapologetic. Dad was still chuckling, shaking his head as if Tyler's tears were somehow amusing. "Kids these days are too soft. A little correction never hurt anyone." Mom nodded in agreement. "We raised you girls with discipline and you turned out just fine." But I hadn't turned out fine. Not if I was sitting here watching my family traumatize my child and thinking it was acceptable. Not if I had somehow learned to normalize this kind of behavior. Tyler's sobs were beginning to quiet, but I could feel his little body trembling against mine. I made a decision in that moment, sitting on my parents' living room floor with spilled milk soaking into the rug around us. I stood up, lifting Tyler into my arms. "We're leaving," I said simply. "Jessica, don't be so dramatic," Mom said, but her laughter had stopped. "It's just a little spill. We can clean it up." I adjusted Tyler in my arms, feeling his small hands grip my shirt tightly. He had stopped crying, but I could feel his body still shaking with residual sobs. The red mark on his cheek was becoming more pronounced, and the sight of it made my stomach clench with anger. "This isn't about the spill," I said, my voice eerily calm. "This is about the fact that you all think it's acceptable to hit a child and then laugh about it." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. It wasn't hitting. It was a correction. There's a difference." "A correction?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You slapped a 5-year-old across the face for accidentally spilling milk. In what world is that an appropriate correction?" "The real world," Dad interjected, finally getting up from his recliner. "The world where children need to learn that their actions have consequences. You're raising him to be soft, Jessica. He needs some toughening up." Tyler's grip on my shirt tightened, and I could feel him pressing his face harder against my shoulder. I wondered how many times I had hidden against my own parents' shoulders as a child, seeking comfort from the very people who should have been protecting me. How many times had I normalized behavior that I was now recognizing as completely unacceptable? "He's 5, I repeated, my voice getting stronger. "He's a kindergartner who accidentally spilled a cup of milk. The appropriate response is to help him clean it up and maybe remind him to be more careful next time, not to hit him." Mom stood up too, her face showing the first signs of concern. "Jessica, you're overreacting. It was barely a tap." "A tap?" I could hear my voice rising, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. Tyler didn't need to hear me yelling too. "Mom, look at his face. Look at the mark on his cheek. That wasn't a tap. She glanced at Tyler, and I saw something flicker across her face. Was it guilt? Regret? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Children are resilient, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. He'll be fine. Will he? I asked. Will he be fine knowing that his aunt hit him and his grandparents laughed about it? Will he be fine knowing that the people who are supposed to love and protect him think it's funny when he gets hurt? The twins were no longer laughing. They had gone quiet, perhaps sensing that this was becoming more serious than they had initially thought. Lisa's face was flushed, and I could see anger building in her eyes. "You're being ridiculous," she said. "This is exactly why your marriage failed, Jessica. You can't handle any kind of conflict or discipline. You just run away." The words hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I was too stunned to respond. She had just used the most painful period of my life, my divorce, the failure of my marriage, the upheaval that had turned Tyler's world upside down, as ammunition in this argument. "My marriage failed," I said quietly, "because I married someone who didn't respect me or my boundaries. It failed because I spent years accepting behavior that wasn't acceptable, making excuses for things that were inexcusable, just like you're all doing right now." I looked around the room at these people I had loved unconditionally for my entire life. I won't make that mistake again. I won't teach my son that it's normal for people who claim to love him to hurt him. Dad's face was getting red now, the way it did when he was really angry. "You're being ridiculous, Jessica. We're your family. We love Tyler. A little discipline never hurt anyone." "Discipline?" I shook my head. "Dad, discipline is setting boundaries, teaching consequences, helping a child learn from their mistakes. This wasn't discipline. This was an adult losing control and taking it out on a child." Tyler lifted his head from my shoulder and looked at me with those big brown eyes. "Mommy, can we go home now?" he asked in a small voice. "Yes, baby. We're going home." I started walking toward the entryway where we had left our jackets. Behind me, I could hear the family's voices rising in protest. "Jessica, you're being unreasonable," Mom called out. "Come back here and let's talk about this like adults." "Adults don't hit children," I replied without turning around. "Adults don't laugh when children are hurt and scared." I set Tyler down long enough to help him put on his jacket, my hands shaking slightly as I zipped it up. He stood quietly, his little hand touching his cheek where the mark was already fading but still visible. "I'm sorry I spilled the milk, Mommy," he whispered. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I told him, kneeling down to his level. "Accidents happen. That's why they're called accidents. You didn't do anything wrong." Lisa appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of anger and something that might have been panic. "Jessica, if you leave now, don't expect us to welcome you back with open arms. We're your family. We're all Tyler has." I stood up and looked at her, really looked at her. If this is what family looks like, then Tyler is better off without it. "You're going to regret this," she said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "The only thing I regret," I replied, "is that it took me this long to realize that love isn't supposed to hurt." I picked Tyler up again and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Mom crying now, and Dad's voice getting louder, demanding that I come back and stop being so dramatic. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. As I opened the front door, Tyler looked back over my shoulder. "Bye, Grandma," he said quietly. The crying behind us got louder, but I didn't stop. I walked out into the crisp October evening, carrying my son away from the people who had just shown me that their love came with conditions I was no longer willing to accept. The drive home was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the car heater and the occasional sniffle from Tyler in his car seat. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, watching his small face in the glow of the streetlights. He was staring out the window, his thumb in his mouth, a habit he had mostly outgrown but returned to when he was stressed or tired. "Tyler?" I said softly as we stopped at a red light. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" He pulled his thumb out of his mouth and looked at me in the mirror. "My face doesn't hurt anymore," he said. "That's good," I replied, though I knew the physical pain was the least of my concerns. Tyler, you know what happened back there wasn't your fault, right? He nodded, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes. Why did Aunt Lisa hit me? The light turned green, and I had to focus on driving while trying to find words that a 5-year-old could understand. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, I said finally. They get angry or frustrated, and they do things that aren't okay. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me too? My heart broke a little more. No, baby, they're not mad at you. They made some bad choices too. But none of this is about you. You're a good boy, Tyler. You're kind and smart and funny, and you didn't deserve what happened tonight. When we got home to our small apartment, I carried Tyler upstairs even though he was perfectly capable of walking. I needed to hold him, to feel his solid warmth against me and know that he was safe. Our apartment was modest, just 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a kitchen that barely fit a table for 2. But it was ours. I ran Tyler a warm bath, adding extra bubbles because he loved them and because I thought he deserved something special after such a difficult evening. As he played with his bath toys, I sat on the edge of the tub and watched him, marveling at his resilience. "Mommy," he said, making a whale sound with one of his toys. "Are we still going to see Grandma and Grandpa?" I had been dreading this question, but I knew I had to be honest. "I don't know, sweetie. What happened tonight? It wasn't okay. And until they understand that, I don't think it's safe for us to visit them." Tyler considered this, his little brow furrowed in concentration. "Because they laughed when I got hurt?" "Yes," I said, surprised by his understanding. "Because they laughed when you got hurt, and because they didn't think it was wrong to hurt you in the first place." He nodded solemnly and went back to playing with his toys. I watched him for a few more minutes, amazed by his ability to process such a complex situation. Children were more perceptive than adults often gave them credit for. After his bath, we went through our normal bedtime routine. I read him 3 stories instead of the usual one, and he didn't protest when I suggested we leave his bedroom door open, something that usually made him feel like a baby. "Mommy," he said as I was tucking him in, "I love you." "I love you too, Tyler. More than all the stars in the sky. More than all the dinosaurs that ever lived." I smiled, remembering his dinosaur book that was now sitting forgotten on my parents' coffee table. "More than all the dinosaurs that ever lived." He smiled back and closed his eyes. I sat in the chair by his bed until his breathing deepened and I was sure he was asleep. Then I went to my own room and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the grandparents Tyler thought he had, for the support system that had crumbled in the span of 10 minutes. I cried for the little girl I had been, who had probably experienced similar moments that I had blocked out or normalized. And I cried for the strength I was going to need to rebuild our lives without the people I had always counted on. The next morning, I woke up to find Tyler sitting at our small kitchen table, carefully eating a bowl of cereal. He had gotten dressed by himself. His shirt was on backward, and his shoes were on the wrong feet, but he had done it independently. "Good morning, Mommy," he said cheerfully. I made myself breakfast. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. "You did such a good job," I said, choosing not to mention the shirt or the shoes. "How did you sleep?" "Good," he said, then paused. "I dreamed about dinosaurs." "Good dreams or scary dreams?" "Good dreams. There was a nice T-Rex who helped me build a fort." I smiled, relieved that his dreams had been peaceful. "That sounds like a wonderful dream." As Tyler finished his breakfast, I made a mental list of everything I needed to do. I needed to call my boss and explain why I might be distracted at work. I needed to research family therapists who specialized in helping children process trauma. I needed to look into community resources for single parents who didn't have extended family support. But first, I needed to have a conversation with Tyler about what our lives might look like moving forward. "Tyler," I said, sitting back down at the table, "you know how we used to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house every Sunday?" He nodded, his spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. "Well, we're not going to be doing that for a while. Maybe not ever again. How do you feel about that?" Tyler thought for a moment. Will we still have Sunday dinners? Yes, I said, suddenly feeling more hopeful than I had in hours. We'll have Sunday dinners, just the two of us. We can cook together, or we can order pizza, or we can have breakfast for dinner. Whatever you want. His face lit up. Can we have pancakes for dinner? Absolutely. We can have pancakes for dinner whenever we want. Over the next few weeks, I kept my promise. We created new traditions, just the two of us. Sunday pancake dinners became a regular thing. I taught Tyler how to flip them, and he taught me about different types of dinosaurs. We went to the library every Saturday morning and checked out stacks of books. We visited museums and parks and discovered parts of Chicago we had never explored before. My phone rang constantly at first. Mom called crying, begging me to come back and talk things through. Dad left voicemails demanding that I stop being so dramatic and return to the family. Lisa sent long text messages, alternating between apologies and accusations. But I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to have those conversations, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Tyler thrived. Without the stress of navigating complex family dynamics, he became more confident, more outgoing. His teacher commented on how much happier he seemed. He made friends at school and was invited to birthday parties. We began building a chosen family of neighbors, coworkers, and other single parents who understood what it meant to put children first. 3 months after that Sunday evening, I finally felt ready to write a letter to my family. I needed to explain my decision, not because I owed them anything, but because I owed it to myself to articulate why I had chosen to walk away. I wrote about boundaries and respect, about the difference between discipline and abuse, about the kind of love that protects rather than harms. I wrote about the Tyler I was raising, confident, kind, empathetic, and how I refused to let anyone teach him that love was supposed to hurt. I ended the letter with an offer. If they were willing to acknowledge that what happened that night was wrong, if they were willing to commit to treating Tyler with the respect and gentleness he deserved, if they were willing to go to family therapy and learn healthier ways to handle conflict, then maybe we could talk about rebuilding our relationship. But if they weren't willing to do those things, then Tyler and I would continue building our life without them. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday evening, my phone was ringing again. This time it was Mom, and her voice was different, quieter, more thoughtful. "Jessica," she said, "I got your letter, and I think maybe you're right. About some things. Maybe we could talk." I looked over at Tyler, who was sitting at our kitchen table working on a puzzle, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. He looked up and smiled at me, completely trusting, completely secure in the knowledge that I would always protect him. "Maybe we could," I said into the phone, "but on our terms, with our rules, and only if you're really ready to change." It was a beginning, not of the relationship we used to have, but of something new, something built on respect instead of obligation, on healthy boundaries instead of blind loyalty. Something that would teach Tyler that love was supposed to feel safe, that family was supposed to be a source of comfort rather than stress. As I hung up the phone, Tyler looked up from his puzzle. "Who was that, Mommy?" "That was Grandma," I said. "She wants to talk about maybe being a family again." Tyler considered this seriously. "Will she be nice to me?" "If she's not," I said, kneeling down beside him, "then she can't be part of our family, because our family is built on being kind to each other." He nodded and went back to his puzzle. "I like our family," he said simply. "I like our family too," I replied. And I meant it. We were small, but we were strong. We were different from what I had always imagined, but we were real. And most importantly, we were safe. That night, as I tucked Tyler into bed, he looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Mommy, I'm proud of you." "Why?" I asked, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Because you took care of me when I was scared," he said. "Because you carried me away from the bad place." I kissed his forehead and turned off the light. "I will always carry you away from bad places," I whispered. "That's what moms do." As I walked to my own bedroom, I realized that Tyler had given me the greatest gift of all. He had shown me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. that I was capable of protecting what mattered most, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to walk away from people who refuse to change. We were going to be okay, more than okay. We were going to be exactly who we were meant to be.